Hello, and thank you for joining us as we explore the 7 key principles of early intervention. We acknowledge that providing services to children and families within early intervention is very different than working in schools or within a clinic or hospital. We hope that this video makes things a bit more clear. First, let's talk a little bit about how the 7 key principles were developed. Back in the early 2000s, a group of leaders in our field were brought together to form a cohort. The goal of that cohort was to establish a common understanding of best practices in providing early intervention for infants and toddlers with delays and disabilities. All of these super smart people agreed that there were 7 principles that are really foundational and have the most impact. Before we step into those 7 fantastic principles, let me explain how today's presentation has been organized. For each one, the principle will be read word for word. Next, I'll explain a little bit more about the principle, what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. We then wanted to share what our professional organizations have to say about the practice conveyed by the principle. We know it's important to you that you hold up your professional responsibilities. We hope this information gives you confidence in doing just that. Lastly, we've asked people from our workforce to share stories from their practice, how each principle has come to life for them in the real world. All right, with that, let's take a look at key principle number 1. Key principle number 1 reads, infants and toddlers learn best through everyday experiences and interactions with familiar people in familiar contexts. This principle essentially means that intervention should be about creating learning opportunities that are functional and based on what the child and family do together. This is about building skills by doing things that are fun and meaningful with people who are naturally in a child's life. It's not about supporting the idea that the things that an early interventionist brings to the house or the things they do are the magic and necessary for child progress. Okay, as promised, we'll share what our professional organizations have to say about the key principles. I would encourage you to pause the video to read your particular organization's statement. Of course, you should also feel free to pause the video and read any or even all of the different statements. Okay, now let's hear from Barb. Barb is an early interventionist in the Wisconsin Birth to 3 program, and she's going to tell us how she has seen key principle number 1 come to life within her practice. I have one kiddo that truly comes to mind. The kiddo's mom and sister initiate all activities with her, and I'm completely hands-off, but offer ideas and tweak the activities they are already doing to make them as meaningful for my birth to 3 kiddo as possible. For instance, her sister loves putting stickers on the window, so I encouraged them to put a little chair close to the window so she could do sit to stands during their activity together. Then we added in chalk markers, which she found extra motivating. The result was hours and hours of fun had while getting stronger, improving balance, and confidence. All right, let's move on to key principle number 2. Key principle number 2 reads, all families with the necessary supports and resources can enhance their child's learning and development. This means that early intervention team members really believe that any family that they work with has the potential to help their child learn. It's about finding their strengths and capacities within their everyday life. It also means that early intervention teams should do everything they can to encourage family engagement with their child. It's not about creating situations where an expert makes assumptions about what a family needs or wants, and it is certainly not about passing judgment on a family. As we move back to those professional organization statements, I would like to remind you to pause the video to read. All right, let's hear from Rachel. Rachel writes, both caregivers were struggling with the child accepting new foods. I asked them open-ended questions about their mealtime routines and schedule, and we were able to schedule our next visit during the child's lunch. This day, they were offering the child chicken with her meal, which is something she won't usually eat. I asked the mother and grandmother questions about what foods the child already likes and ways we could use that information to make chicken more appealing. Her mother reported that she loves maple syrup and had the creative idea of using it as a dip for the chicken. I love giving caregivers the opportunity to solve a problem on their own before I jump in with the answers right away. Key principle number 3 reads, the primary role of the service provider in early intervention is to work with and support the family members and caregivers in the child's life. This is really about supporting families. It's about developing a relationship and coaching families. As much as our early interventionists love working with those infants and toddlers, it's even more important that their interactions with the adults in the child's life be strong. This isn't a traditional form of education or therapy in which one works only with the child. This is about parents understanding how to support their child's development within their daily lives. Let's take a minute to hear how Michelle is sure to involve parents and caregivers in her home visits. I actively work to engage every caregiver in attendance at the home visit. Grandparents, nannies, and friends all get pulled into visits when I'm around. If I model a strategy, I'll go around and have each parent or caregiver take a turn trying that technique with the child. If a person seems hesitant when I ask them to try something new, I often use the phrase, tell me one thing that you really enjoy doing with the child. I then try to incorporate the therapy strategy within the caregiver's chosen special activity. First, I might be coaching mom how to do language expansion strategies during quiet book reading, and then shift and help dad include the same strategies during roughhousing play, all within one visit. Every caregiver has the potential to help their child. Let's move on to key principle number 4 that reads, the early intervention process from initial contacts through transition must be dynamic and individualized to reflect the child's and family members' preferences, learning styles, and cultural beliefs. Principle 4 is about individualizing and respecting each family's unique qualities. It means that families should be active participants in all aspects of service as true decision makers and team members from start to finish. It's not about creating a service delivery system that's inflexible and based on the priorities of the professionals on the team. And it's certainly not about providing prescriptive services that don't reflect the values and priorities of the child and the family. Now we'll hear from Erin, who has a great example of how Principle 4 came to light in her practice. I have had the honor of providing services for multiple Amish families in our community. Through these experiences, I have learned ways to adapt services to fit their cultural beliefs and values. I know not to recommend use of pictures, light-up toys, or mirrors for visual support. I understand that they value hard work and being outside, working with animals, and adjust our interventions and goals accordingly to maximize carryover. All right, we're at key principle number 5, which reads, IFSP outcomes must be functional and based on children's and families' needs and priorities. This principle refers to the IFSP, or the Individualized Family Service Plan, which guides goals and services for eligible children and their families. You can think of it as the little brother or sister to the IEP in schools if you're more familiar with that. I like to point out that the F is for families. This highlights that the outcomes or the goals for the child and family must be functional and aimed at improving the child's participation in meaningful activities and routines. So in the picture here, you see a little guy blowing out his birthday candles. That's both functional and it's also meaningful. Birthdays are often meaningful for families. It's not about writing goals based solely on things such as traditional test results, skill deficits, or in terms of what services they're receiving. This picture depicts simple blowing for the sake of blowing. So maybe we know that it's important that kids can blow, and maybe this child can't blow, but we wouldn't just simply teach them how to blow for the sake of blowing. Let's hear from Sarah on key principle number 5. During our RBI, that stands for routines-based interview, we talked about them going places together. Mom liked to take him to the library story hour and playgroup, but he always stayed close to her and didn't interact with the other kids. Mom rated this time of day as somewhat challenging because he was hesitant to play with others. Together we talked about what might make these outings more enjoyable for both of them, and Mom discovered that maybe it would be more fun if he was confident in using words to talk to the kids rather than needing to have Mom talk for him. Mom then found it valuable to help him learn words that he could use with kids, even though communication between the two of them seemed to work without a lot of words. We had fun brainstorming how this might look. Then they'd go to a playgroup and try it, come back and report about all the friends that he had made. Moving on to key principle number 6. The family's priorities, needs, and interests are addressed most appropriately by a primary provider who represents and receives team and community support. This principle is all about how a team works together. It's about the team, which includes the parent, identifying one consistent person to be most aware of the changing circumstances, needs, and support being provided to the child, as well as the interests, strengths, and demands in a family's life. It's somewhat similar to what you might see in other educational settings or in the medical field. So, our model doesn't look like a bunch of different professionals coming into the house separately. It's not about one interventionist providing services in isolation from the team or without access to other team members. It's also important to note that it does not involve just choosing a provider based solely on the skill deficits of the child. Marty has a great way of explaining key principle number 6. She writes, "Trust in relationships provides a basis for everything else. It's difficult for parents who are already worried about their little one to develop multiple trusting relationships with multiple providers. Also, with the primary provider model, parents and caregivers become the experts in their child's care and development. And in those instances, I have seen a very positive change in the involvement of parents when their child enters the school system. When this program encouraged multiple weekly visits from several professionals, parents and caregivers felt they didn't have the skills to encourage their child's development. They didn't own their child's progress, and they lacked confidence and knowledge that they could make a positive difference." Okay, we made it to the end. Last but not least is key principle number 7. Interventions with children and families must be based on explicit principles, validated practices, best available research, and relevant laws and regulations. This is about knowing the evidence base and research for the work we do in the field of early intervention. It's about using the best and most currently available research. This is not about our service delivery and systems being based in the latest popular idea, or as we sometimes call it, this shiny object. Bridget has a great example of holding true to this key principle number 7. She writes, I have a lot of parents lately who are asking me about exercises that they find online that will increase oral motor skills for speaking. I help them to understand that any so-called oral motor exercise must be linked with sound production to appropriately develop neurological pathways to elicit the muscle movement from their language center. It's great to be able to explain to parents that the simple things are proven to be the most effective and to show them how they can do it, like just blowing or imitating the movement and then quickly transitioning it to a sound. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn with us today. We hope that knowing more about the 7 key principles of early intervention will positively impact you in your work within the Wisconsin Birth Degree Program. If you have any questions at all or need support, please reach out to the Resource Professional Development Team. Take care.